Good morning, everybody. Phil called me as I was driving in this morning and said he was ill and couldn't make it. He then said, you'll have to get there early, and to let him in the door. Unfortunately, I have no idea what he looks like. But in any event, I was happy to find when I got here that our speaker, Brad Eggleston, was already here, standing at the podium. He's going to be speaking to you today about the use of the H2a visa process as part of the agricultural programs in the country. And let me give you just a brief recital of his background. Brad is the Senior Manager of Human Resources at Coleman Agriculture and has over 25 years of senior level human resource experience. He has a background in various modes in the transportation industry, including ground transportation, brokerage, logistics management, and air cargo, as well as prior HR experience in retail and manufacturing. His objective is to develop human resources best practices through people, processes, and corporate culture development. He received his SHRM, Senior Certified Professional, and HRCI, Senior Professional in Human Resources Certification in 2002, and is a graduate of Nebraska Wesleyan University with a bachelor's degree in business and accounting. Please welcome Brad.
Good morning, everyone. It looks like a pretty rough crowd. I was told, Phil said, you got to watch these people. They're pretty rough. They've got some pretty good questions. Thank you for the opportunity. I've worked for the Coleman family for the last 2.5 years in the HR department, and I've found the whole ag industry to be very interesting, but most importantly, the H2a visa program. I want to start by giving you a little bit of background about the Coleman family and the time that they spent in agriculture. The Coleman started farming in 1847, which according to me was before Oregon statehood, which I believe was in 1859. In 2014, 3 family members got together to form Coleman Agriculture. 2 brothers and a 2 brothers and their cousin, along with their spouses, started Coleman Ag. Coleman Ag manages over 7,500 acres of farmland in the Willamette Valley. Some of it we own directly, and other we contract to farm. The purpose of Coleman Ag, when they put it together 5 years ago, was to leave the business better than they received it for the next generation. The current owners of Coleman Agriculture are the 6th generation of the Coleman family in the Willamette Valley. Our crops, we have a broad range of crops, from hops, hazelnuts, hemp, a lot of different seed crops, and a variety of row crop vegetables. We are, however, the largest hop grower in Oregon. This graph depicts the crops per acre that we currently grow. We have a small amount of wheat, about 700 acres, vegetable crops, which are green beans, corn, zucchini, cauliflower. We have about 1,600 acres, no less than that, 800 acres of vegetables. Seed crops include grass for seed, includes garlic for seed, and radish for seed. We have about 1,700 acres of grass and another 500 or 600 acres of other crops. We have a small orchard of apples and cherries, and about 1,800 acres of hops in 3 different locations. Last year, we dabbled a little bit in hemp. We had about 40 acres of hemp and have experimented with that and it's a whole new market, and quite honestly, it is not a big moneymaker. There's a lot of work, and there's not much of a demand for extraction of CBD in hemp. We also have some hazelnut orchards, about 500 or 600 acres of hazelnuts, and we also grow hay. We have about a 1,000-acre hay crop that we use to sell to the dairy industry in the Willamette Valley and out on the coast. I want to show you a short video. This is called a grower profile of Coleman agriculture. It was put together by Yakima Chief Hops, and it's to be used to introduce Coleman and the Coleman hop crop to different craft brewers in the state.
My family has been growing hops since probably the late 1800s. My grandfather bought this farm from his grandmother. She inherited it from her father, who was growing hops at the time. The Willamette Valley has probably been known across the U.S. since Lewis and Clark were out here. The fact that it was such a rich area for farming was probably secondary because nobody really knew until they got here, and then they realized what they'd run into. And so in the case of the Coleman family, they came out in about the mid-1800s following some relatives. And so it was a matter of just families, and they liked the area. They said, you need to come out, and so they got on the wagon train and came out. Interesting enough, my great-great-grandfather settled in around St. Paul and then moved over by Yam Hill, which is about 30 miles away. Didn't like it, wanted to come back. He left his family, had 12 kids. He left them at the mission, went down to the gold fields in California, found some gold, came back, and he bought the farm that today is part of the farm we were on. We have a cousin that's involved, and then my brother and I, and then our wives came together to start Coleman Ag. And this is the home farm. It's the farm my grandparents started, and my dad and his brothers and sisters were raised on, and actually we were raised on. And then a little later we bought the Independence Farm, or alluvial farm. In the mid-70s, the monastery over in Mount Angel, the priests couldn't have a business that made money if they were asking for money. So they had to make a decision not to be farmers anymore. And so they rented the farm out, and they had a relationship with our parents and grandparents. And so they asked us if we'd be interested, and that's kind of how that all started. It's crazy that, you know, it's lasted as long as it has. I think because of the agriculture in the area, they've always been successful because of what the ground can produce. We've tried to take a little bit more technology and science and put it into there, and hired some really smart people to help us.
The Terroir project started in 2018. Liz had this great vision of what it could be, and she was really that great spark for the project. So if we start by our definition of terroir, it's the regional influence of soil, climate, and cultural practices that influence the flavor and aroma of a crop, in our case, hops.
The group was taking a field trip. We were at a winery. The winemaker and owner was walking through and went into great description of the relationship between terroir and grapes and their wines and the distinction between their regions, where this thought occurred to me, if that is the way it is for wines, it has to have been the same way for hops to beer.
It's given us further insight into managing our fields. We now have detailed soil maps of our farms that we can set up our irrigation design differently. We can try to take on our fertilizer program, alter it to different soil needs, and then also just starting to try to understand a little bit more if soil type can also influence aroma profile.
I think the goal for me is to continue to improve how we lay out the farm. Which varieties grow best on this soil, and which varieties grow better on the west side of the farm versus the east side of the farm, and which ones grow better in St. Paul, you know. So gathering all that soil data and seeing how those hops are different, I think it's going to help us improve the quality of what the brewers want.
We hope to collaborate and continue moving forward with this project, especially into phase 2. And we're just really hoping to align everyone, you know, the growers, the brokers, and the brewers, and we see it as a win-win for everyone, even the consumers, because they get to know where their product is coming from, just like people care about where their food comes from. You know, we want people to care about where their hops come from for their beers.
With the Terroir project, we're able to see the cultural practices at those specific farms and almost mimic those across all of the farm.
Well, I think it's a good idea. It hasn't been done before. I know just from farming and so do a lot of other people that do ground, just things are different in St. Paul area versus down here. Yeah, well, we dug 2 test plots and they had soil science people here and they've gotten down in these pits and they could show us how the soil types were different, even though the 2 pits were only 400 feet apart. And I like this terroir thing because even to me, I mean, I learned a lot from it.
So fast forward a year later, we've just wrapped up the study, and it is conclusive that there are distinct differences between not only our regions in which we grow our hops and the varieties within, there's a distinction to the hop analysis as well. And then at the end of the study, we did a sensory analysis, so the aroma of hops. Is there a detection in the flavor that makes them different?
I think it's just exciting. We're just kind of scratching the surface as far as what's going to happen out of that to our project and what it will do for us and the quality of hops we can produce for YCH in the future. They connect very, very well between the brewer and the farm, and we really like that, and we've had a lot of success with that, and we thought that was a great opportunity for us.
It's a wonderful feeling to see that generation are ambitious. The only ones we hear about are those that aren't. But there's a whole lot of them out there. They like this kind of a business. It's fun to see them and work with them and the amount of things they can do for you. And there's a world of knowledge out there. And so I think that's the exciting part about it. None of us know what tomorrow will bring, but with good management and skills, it will keep going.
I'm going to cover a little bit about the farm expenses. We have found that there are 3 largest expenses on our farm are fuel, chemicals and fertilizer, and labor. Labor is the one cost that we have that keeps going up year after year after year, and you're going to see some examples of that as I go through the presentation. Here's a quick Oregon stat on farm labor. Oregon is number 5 in the nation for unskilled farm worker jobs at 5,750. The mean wage, $12.71, and this is going to be interesting when we start talking about the H2a program and the pay rate that we are obligated to pay, because you look at this and go, wow, the minimum wage right now is $11.25. The mean is about $1.50, and so the top wage is going to be somewhere around, what, 12, 13, 14 and a quarter? So why do we have to pay more when we bring in the immigrants from Mexico under the H2a program? Hops are very labor intensive. I think that video, it gives you a really good example, and you can see some of the labor that's involved in growing hops. We are starting our growing season right now, and we're working toward an end, and that end is in September during the harvest. We're watching very closely the shoots coming out of the hop hills, and as they start to come out, we're going to kill them. We're going to cut them back, because when we start the process, we want to be certain that all of the hop bines are the same length. Our first step in this process is stringing hops or twining hops, and that starts by tying a cord from the top of the trellis and anchoring it in the ground at the hop hill. We have a cart with all the string on it, and people are actually taking that string, wrapping it around in a lark's head, pulling it tight, dropping it to the ground, and someone beneath is grabbing a clip and anchoring it in the ground. About 3 or 4 weeks after we start stringing, we're going to train the hops, and an individual is going to go to each hop hill, and we have tens of thousands of hop hills. And at each hop hill, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to identify the chief vine, which is kind of a fibrous vine, and they're going to cut those off. Sometimes there's 1 or 2. And then they're going to select 3 or 4 vines of the same length and wrap them clockwise around that string. tens of thousands of hills, each one. So you can see how labor intensive that is. And once we finish that process of getting them trained, and it's usually 2 times through the field, then we start the scouting process. And the scouting process means walk those hop fields every day, and we're looking for downy mildew, we're looking for parasites that are invading the hops, because they can invade a hop so quickly and ruin the integrity of that hop cone in harvest. At harvest, we have a very short window period, just like we do at the start of the growing season, where different varieties mature at different rates, and we have to get in the field, get them picked, and stripped down and into a hop kiln to be dried, baled, and delivered. So our work is really about windows of opportunity. We have to have the equipment and we have to have the labor available when Mother Nature tells us it's time to take that next step. A few years ago, we looked into the H2a visa program to help us supplement our labor force that we would generally get from the Willamette Valley. The H2a program is for U.S. employers only, or their agents, so we could actually have someone act as our agent and represent us through the process. It is for the need of temporary agricultural workers, and temporary only. A little bit of history on this H2a visa program. It really started back in 1952 when the government started a H2 visa process, and that was for immigrants to do agricultural work. In 1986, with the Immigration and Reform Act under President Reagan, which was generally designed to improve the security at the border, there was a thought that said if we improve the security at the border, we may have a shortage of workers. So therefore, we're going to split this H2 visa into an H2a visa and provide an opportunity for labor from other countries to come in and help the agricultural industry. There are some requirements of the H2a visa program that are very specific. First of all, we have to anticipate a shortage. It is not intended to displace domestic workers and is actually referred to sometimes as a domestic worker protection program. It's ag, labor, or services only for an H2a, and it's temporary in nature, and it usually lasts from 1 to 10 months. When we talk about seasonal workers in agriculture, we're generally talking of employment of about 6 months. Doesn't vary very much, usually 6 months. The process that we have to go through, if you like bureaucracy, you're going to love this process. It's amazing. It was amazing to me the first time I stepped into it, because you just seemed like you get deeper and deeper and deeper into regulations. So here are the government entities that we have to work with. And it starts with the State Workforce Agency. And we file to get a work contract with the State Workforce Agency. And we have a window that we have to do that in. And that is 60 to 75 days before our identified date of need. And so right now we're looking at our date of need being March 31st. So we filed at the 61st day, and there's a reason that we did that at the 61st day. Once the State Workforce Agency approves our application, it goes to the Department of Labor to get a temporary labor certificate. If it's approved by the Department of Labor, then it goes to USCIS for their approval to get another certification. And we are then approved, but it doesn't stop there. We then have to take the workers that we've recruited in Mexico and take them to the consulate, and the Department of State will issue a visa. They'll interview people, not everybody gets through. They'll issue them a visa, and then the U.S. Customs and Border Protection issues an I-94. And now we're ready to bring some workers up to the country. This is a flow chart of that process. All the yeses and nos and everything that can happen. This is the best part right here. Congratulations. That's what we're working for. That's what we want right there. We are not going to go through every step. I'm not going to bore you with all this. But there are some specific requirements when we bring in H2a guest workers. One of those is transportation. We have an obligation to pay for transportation for that worker from their home all the way to the work site. So we have to calculate and reimburse from their home if it's a taxi or a bus to another station to get on a bus, to get to the recruiter, to get to the border, and then from the border up to the work site. We also are responsible to provide housing, and the housing has regulatory requirements regarding the size of the housing, the accommodations that we provide, and we also either have to provide 3 meals a day or facilities, a kitchen, cookware, plates, everything, so that these workers have a place to eat. There is also a statutory minimum wage that is set. So we either have to pay the higher of the minimum wage, or if it's under a labor agreement, that labor agreement cost, or the AWR rate. And the AWR rate is calculated by a survey done through the Department of Labor. But this slide shows a little bit of information about the number of positions that were certified by the Department of Labor and the visas that were issued. And you can see the growth of the program. Back in 2005, there was hardly anything. But now there are over 250,000 positions that are certified by the Department of Labor. There's the old AWR. They start talking AWR to people, and this is a big, big issue. So the first thing that happens is the government takes these surveys, and these surveys can be done by at the state level or by the Department of Agriculture, provided to the Department of Labor, and they calculate what they feel is the annual weighted average wage. And when you see what it is, and we talked earlier a little bit about what that mean wage was, you can see why it gets a little confusing. And we have to pay a wage, and the idea behind this is it does not impact a domestic worker adversely. So here's what happened to the AWR rate from 2011 to 2020. For the state of Oregon, our wage rate over those 9 years went up 49%. And the same for Washington, 49%. Another big user of the H2a visa program is North Carolina. Their wage rate went up 36% in those 9 years. This shows the difference in the wage rate from last year to this year. Last year we paid $15.03 an hour was the AWR rate, and this year it is $15.93. So that's over a 5% increase. Generally, when you start talking wage increases in the public sector, 3 to 4%, but we're constantly hit with that 5, 6, 7% increase in wages. I threw together a quick chart as a wage comparison so you can kind of see what is going on. So those blue bars are the federal minimum wage, which hasn't changed in the last 6 years, $7.25. The Oregon minimum wage changed, and that 2015, that's the January 1 rate, and then there was a new legislation in Oregon that changed it to a July 1st adjustment, and you can see what's happened over the last 6 years. We've gone from $9.25 to $12 an hour minimum wage in Oregon. The AWR rate's gone from $12.42 to $15.83 is what we're going to have to pay this year. So we looked at the percent that we have to pay above the Oregon minimum wage. We are consistently above 30% above the minimum wage. This year, we'll be paying 32% above the minimum wage for an unskilled farm laborer position. This graph depicts the A work to a minimum wage. That's a federal minimum wage. We are 140% this year of the federal minimum wage, $7.15, lots of money. Here's what we've used, how we've used the H2a program at Coleman Agriculture over the last few years. We started in 2017 and only brought in 44 workers for one contract. They worked through the growing season and into the harvest season. We found out that it really worked pretty well for us, and in 2018, we brought in 90 workers for the growing season, sent them home for about 5 weeks, and then brought them back for the harvest. Our harvest normally lasts 5 or 6 weeks, and we brought in 106. That was our capacity that we had to house people. In 2019, we had 110 and 96 in the harvest. This year, we cut back a little bit, and we'll locate our H2a workers at one farm only and one work site. But we also anticipate bringing 110 workers in this fall. Why do we use the program? Because the workers that we bring in are reliable, we know they're legal, and they're very productive. Without this program, you're going to see that we'd have a big labor shortage. So people are reliable, and because they come here to work. They are confined really into our housing units, even though we provide transportation, but they are here to work. We found that less than 1.1% of domestic workers who get referrals from a state workforce agency actually take those referrals and accept a job on a farm. A 15-year study in the state of North Carolina said only 0.0004% of all the domestic job seekers finish the season. How can you staff a growing season that is so unpredictable if you can't have a predictable workforce? And we have experienced the same. Last year, we accepted approximately 250 applications for our growing season from domestic workers. 10 of them finished the growing season. That is a lot of paperwork to process, and people coming and going, and people you have to train and orient to do the job each year. Here's the reliability. I love this chart. This is the people who completed a work contract. So that big drop, kind of this purple line right here, that represents the U.S. workers who started working under or in conjunction with an H2a work contract. And it drops off, and after 8 weeks, maybe 4% finish the job. However, the top line represents the workers under the H2, they're guest workers from Mexico, and you can see that about 90% of them finished the work contract. So that, we talk about reliability, that's what we have to depend upon. The other part of it is legal workers. We know everyone who comes through the H2a visa program is legal. They're going to go to the consulate, they're going to be interviewed, issued a visa, issued an I-94 temporary work permit. So we don't have issues with them being legal. However, we found, and we looked at some statistics, 21% of U.S. ag workers are lawful, but 30% are unauthorized immigrants to work in the country. And there is a big risk for us if we hire someone who is illegal, because we could be faced with massive fines. This is a quick shot, and I know this is difficult to read, but there's some really good information here on the H2a versus undocumented workers. The fact that an H2a worker gets free housing, the housing quality, they have to be inspected, and the wage rate is quite a bit higher than if someone would come here illegally. We also found that the H2a workers are very productive. They come here for one reason. They've generally come from an agricultural area of Mexico. They have experience, and they want to do the job. 93% of all the immigrant workers in the agriculture in the U.S. are from Mexico. Now, the government dictates what countries we can invite workers in from, but it is very close, so your transportation is less, and the people are experienced. If they stay in Mexico and work, minimum wage, $6.50 a day. They come here and they work in Oregon with an AWR rate of $15.83. There's a difference. They generally work 70 hours a week for 17 weeks. In Mexico, they'd make $774. Come to the U.S. and work, over almost $19,000. In Mexico, that takes a family from about the 1 or 2 percentile as far as wage earnings to the 98th percentile. So you can see why somebody really, people are calling me every day now wanting to come up again and work for us because they look at that opportunity and that's what they want. The good part is for them. How about for our economy? How does it impact our economy? Are they taking that $19,000 that they earn and spending it here? No, they aren't. They're sending it back. So that's one of the detriments of the program when you look at the overall economy. The other problem is we keep raising our labor rates, and at some point in time, we are not going to be able to produce food. And food is going to be produced outside of our country. And that's going to be a big problem. But overall, right now, this is working for us. So, little pros and cons and what we think is working and not working. 90 to 95% of the people that show up at the border get a visa and come through legally. There's no cap on H2a visas right now, as there are some other visas that have caps on them, so the availability is not an issue. If you have the housing, you can get H2a workers, and they're very reliable. The cons, bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork. You can get denied in the process. And if you're counting on 110 workers and then you don't get them, you've got a problem. So you really have to follow the regulations. And our intent as an organization is we follow the regulations. Some of them are difficult to interpret, but we want to follow the regulations. We're going to do it right. The application process can take up to 4 months, and there's so many details that we have to follow. The first application that we filed this year with the state got rejected because we had one typo in it. They said, nope, send it back. And we started all over again and worked through the process. And the real con is, boy, it costs a lot of money. When you look at the high labor rate, we pay transportation, we provide housing. If we were to build labor camp housing today to house 30 workers, it would cost about $1.3 million. Because of the requirements in the building codes. So it is not cheap to provide housing. We provide transportation when they get here, or meals, and that means we have to provide the buses and we have to provide drivers for these people also. There is some changes on the horizon, or potential changes on the horizon. The House passed a bill last year called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, and that mandates electronic filing instead of paper filing. It updates how we calculate the AWR rate. Don't know if it's going to do us a lot of good here, but there are some changes there. And it provides some hiring flexibility where we can have staggered times that we start using workers. A lot of the agricultural associations across the country really think this is going to be something to be beneficial. I doubt it's going to make it through the Senate. I just don't see it making through the Senate. So if it does, then we'll adjust as we move forward. That's it.
Hi, Brad. I have a question for you. When you met the first contact I had with this H2a visas years ago, I represented a large nursery in Pennsylvania, and they told me without that program, same thing your statistics show, they simply could not get domestic workers. They couldn't find people that were willing to work that hard all day. And when you watch some of these people, there's a large nursery in Mount Angel I drive by all the time, Kramer Nursery. I mean, those people really work hard, and that's hard physical work. So you're lucky to have the program.
Yes, we are, and I really, it's hats off to these workers, both domestic and foreign workers. It is hard work, very hard work. But without that labor supply, we would have hops that would just deteriorate on the vine, and there's a lot of perishable food. This program is used a lot in Yakima and the apple orchards, and it is so critical you get crops out of the field at the time that they're ready.
Okay, my turn. The costs involved for each of these workers seem staggering. Have you figured out at what point you reach break even and then declining profitability?
We really haven't figured that out. Each year toward the fall, we're going to see what that new rate is, and we run through our calculation and say, how's that going to impact our total labor cost for that crop, and what do we anticipate for revenue from it? So it's one of those things that we're looking at each year, and I just can't tell you at what point are we going to say we can't do it.
Okay, over here, this is Wayne. Do you have other markets for your hemp other than for CBD?
No, that's all. We grow industrial hemp only right now.
I mean, as far as fiber or something.
There isn't much of a market for that biomass fiber. We looked at that, but what we've really seen is a market for CBD.
Hi, my name is Kay. The term unskilled labor, I think, is a term that's been around a long time, but I just wanted to comment that when you described the labor itself, it seemed like there were quite a few skills involved. And I wondered, and maybe you said this and it wasn't clear to me, do the domestic workers earn the same hourly wage, and are they provided with any housing, or is that only for the visa holders?
The answer is yes to both of those. So if we have a domestic worker who works, so when we write the contract, it says you apply for work sites, crops, and functions. And if someone works at that farm in hops, stringing and training, regardless of domestic or foreign, they get paid that AWR rate. In regards to the housing, if someone is working for us and lives within a reasonable commute, we would not provide the housing. If they don't, then we have to provide housing. And here's a pretty good example. We had a phone call from somebody in Alabama that said, I'm interested in your program. I want to fill out an application. We're obligated to give them an application. And if they're qualified to do the job, we pay for their transportation from Alabama. We put them in our housing. So we treat everybody the same.
Hi, my name is Ingrid. I used to do the accounting for a farm in Salem, and we had the same problem with domestic workers. When we applied the most for one season, most applicants we got were maybe 8 or 10 people, and they lasted usually less than a week, while the Mexicans were very reliable and the most hardworking people I ever saw. I really was amazed.
Yep, very much so. And we also have a challenge because it's the type of work, the weather conditions. We'll hire people and they'll work a week and they'll look at it and say, oh, I'm going to have 5 more weeks here at this pay rate, but I see on the horizon that I can get 25 cents an hour more or less for 10 weeks. I'm out of here. I'm going someplace else. And people just move around and follow that work. And you're right, it is so difficult to keep people.
This is Barbara. I would think that since you're offering room and board, you would not have to pay the higher rate. It seems like they're getting paid more than minimum wage when they're getting room and board?
That is one of the concerns, and right now there's a federal register for the H2a visa program, separate from the Workforce Modernization Act, that addresses some of those things, but it doesn't look like it's going through. It looks like we cannot charge for housing and will not be able to do that in the future. The interesting part about those federal regulations, the comment period just closed, and they had over 80,000 comments to changes in those regulations. So we don't anticipate to see any final regs on that probably until the end of this year.
Hi. I assume the increase in wages has affected your pricing strategy, and I'm wondering if it's impacted the demand for the product and if it's had an impact on your profits.
It really has, but here's kind of a little twist to that. Many years ago, the major people who wanted the hops were the big brewers, the Anheuser-Busch, the Miller-Coors now, and we had contract with them for large quantities of hops. They'd come in and say, we want you to grow 200 acres of hops. We want everything that comes off of there. The craft brew in Oregon has really saved us a lot because there's different varieties, and that's changed the whole scope of how people purchase hops. They'll use dry hops, fresh hops for brew. They'll use pellets. They'll use a lot of different products. And the beer consumption in our country is dropping about 3 or 4% a year. But if you look at and separate craft brew and craft beers, they're increasing about 6 or 7%. So that is our opportunity right now, is to provide different varieties and specialty hops for the craft brew industry. And that's made the difference for us.
Do they pay taxes?
The immigrant workers?
Yes.
They pay federal and state taxes, but we are not obligated to take FICA or Medicare taxes out of their pay.
Hi, this is Don over on this side. Thank you, Brad. That was that gave a nice perspective on. You see all of these big farms out here, and you have no idea how it operates. A couple of things. One is it's easy to badmouth bureaucracy, but we only have to look to history to see why a lot of those regulations are there. The history of the migrant workers in this part of the country is pretty bleak when you look back at some of the history, how they were treated. And so regulation kind of comes about to try and undo some of those things that happen. And yes, unfortunately, it's a big part of what you have to go through. But I think we all benefit because of most of them. Secondly, and I noticed some of the members of my class here seem to have this idea that minimum wage is a fair wage. And I mean, good on you that you're doing 36% above it, but I would make an argument that minimum wage is woefully inadequate. And all you have to do is go down Mary and Center Street and see the homeless to see what's happened to the middle class and the lower class, the workers that have gone out. They can't afford homes. Bernie Sanders suggested that we should all get to $15 an hour for minimum wage. And one of the things that's shocking about that is that 1/4 of all American workers would get a raise if we went to $15 an hour. So, you know, I would say I like beer and I like good hops, but I should probably be paying twice as much for a beer than
I think you're exactly right. And there was a great study done by the University of Oregon about the migrant population in the state that I found very interesting. And I agree with you. Yeah. Absolutely. And do you know anybody that can live on $7.25 an hour? I don't even know why we have a federal minimum wage. But we pay, a fair wage and for the work that people do. It's sad sometimes that it's just not a livable wage.
Hi, this is Judy. I'm over here on the...
Judy.
Yeah. There's a lot of training that goes involved for the workers with your hops. Are you able to get return people? If people worked out really well one year, is there some way that they can come back the next year after they go back to Mexico?
We have about a 95% return rate, and we think that is because not only just the type of work, but how we treat our employees. And we realize that we want those people coming back. They have that skill. And it's that fine balance. I know I use that term of an unskilled versus skilled, and quite often that is nothing more than how much training does it take. It doesn't take a lot of training, but I'll tell you what, it takes a lot of manual dexterity to string and train a hop. It's an amazing job.
Hi, I'm Deborah. I'm also a hop grower, but wait, let me tell you that was 3 pots of hops in the backyard, strung up and across the veranda of our porch because of my husband's and son's home brew project. They were very lovely, though, looking, and I made wreaths, and they were great. But my question really is, thinking about 70-hour weeks and the physical demands of the job, what happens if someone's injured during their work with you? Who pays if they need to go to the hospital? Who picks up the tab, or what
all the guest workers are covered under all the labor laws of the state and federal government, so they are all covered under the workers' compensation of the state of Oregon. And we did have a worker that got injured last year, and after he got injured, we found out that it wasn't work related, and he didn't have the money to pay the doctor bill, so we paid it for him. We just don't make it a big issue. We want to take care of them. And so when we have that opportunity, we will take care of those workers.
My name is Arthur. Is there any kind of cooperation between what you're growing and some of the other crops that are around, so that perhaps some of these workers could have a longer stretch of continuous employment if they want? I'm thinking particularly of the wineries, but any other crop that when they're not working for you, they could be working for somebody else.
There is an opportunity, but we found quite often there's a crossover in that need. And you'll see so we'll start using people end of March and want to use through June. Mid-May, the wineries are hired, and they're out in the vineyards, starting to prune and prepare there. So we have that big crossover. We've talked to some blueberry farms trying to find some transition for workers. And we've also found that after hop harvest, we've got hemp harvest, and we could move people to Christmas trees. But it's very difficult to figure out that transfer. We did send 26 of our H2a guest workers down to Northern California last year to work in strawberries. They were doing some strawberry propagation. So it worked out really good for them. So when we find an opportunity, we'll certainly take advantage of it. And we're even looking at whether or not we want to be a farm labor contractor, because that concept is about continuous employment, and to utilize that certification to help find continuous work for people, domestic workers.
I have a quick comment. Could you keep your comments to questions, actually, instead of comments? And we only have 5 minutes, so we have a lot of people with questions.
Okay, so this is Irene. My question is, we've all been aware that NORPAC has gone bankrupt and left a lot of farmers in the lurch, including workers and farmers, 150 farmers. There's a thing on PBS this morning about that. But nobody seems to have heard, why did they go bankrupt? Was it some of these issues that you're talking about? Do you have any idea?
I'm not certain why they filed for the bankruptcy. I know that a lot of their plants were dated and it was costing a lot. There's that transition from canned vegetables to frozen vegetables, which is very expensive. We did a lot of contract work for NORPAC, green beans, sweet corn, and it's a co-op, and it's very interesting, and it cost us a lot, and now we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with some of our acreage because we don't have contracts coming up. So we're switching crops.
Jeanette, thank you very much for acknowledging the significance of the workers. The essential nature of them. It seems like it's almost like a partnership between the growers and the workers. I mean, you can't have one without the other. I'd like to see more positive acknowledgement of the gift they are to all of us for the food. Are there any plans in place so that we would hear more of that positive reinforcement of them rather than kind of putting them down?
I think that comes on a individual farm basis, and I look at the Coleman family and our culture and the values that we have and how much we value our employees, because we realize without those employees we wouldn't exist and we wouldn't be able to provide the food that we provide or the hops that we provide. So our goal has always been to recognize those employees that help make us successful and share with them that success.
Hi, this is Jan Spingen. I just have a comment, not a question. But I personally know the Coleman family, John and Liz Coleman. These are incredible people. I mean, this is a quality family who really care about their workers. So, just giving a shout out.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Roz over here.
Roz, where's
I am next, aren't I?
Okay.
What can you tell us about enforcement of farm companies that illegally hire immigrant farm workers? Because it seems like, if they're doing it on the cheap, not paying the correct wage, not providing housing or very substandard housing, that they, if they're harvesting or growing the same crop, they would undercut the farms that are going through the H2a process, doing it right, and especially since there's no cap on the H2a. So what's your view of the enforcement situation out there?
So we're seeing increased enforcement from Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, ICE. We're seeing more I-9 audits, very strict audits that, and an I-9 is a form that has to be filled out to authorize a worker, and they have to provide the documentation. So we're seeing more and more enforcement, which I really think is good, because again, we're going to follow the regulations, and maybe that will weed out some of the people who don't want to follow those regulations.
Hi, my name's Tracy, and I'm wondering if, with respect to the few domestic workers that do apply and work for you, but you would have to pay FUTA and SUTA tax, payroll taxes on their work for unemployment benefits. Is it a wash as terms of you probably wouldn't have to provide housing if they were local? I mean,
we don't have to provide housing.
Right. So you don't have to pay FUTA and SUTA for the H2A workers, correct?
No, we do pay SUTA-FUTA for H2A workers.
You do?
Yeah. The only
Okay.
tax that we do not pay is the FICA and Medicare. So we save 7.65% on those guest workers, but we have to pay it on the domestic workers even at that higher rate.
Brad, on behalf of ICL, I wanted to thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting and very informative.
Thank you for the opportunity.